Today, we're going to talk about using our emotions for good. Emotions, just almost the name emotions makes you feel a little bit emotional, you know? And I think particularly, I don't know, can anybody remember when you were a kid, since most of the kids are out of here, can you remember when you were a kid and your mom would cry? Does anybody remember that? Your mom ever crying? Okay. Did that make you feel happy or sad? Scared or, I never ever liked for my mom to cry. And I've noticed my kids don't like for their mom to cry, and they try to do everything they can do to it just changes the atmosphere if mom cries. And so emotions are very powerful. I know I don't need to tell you some of this. Some of you already know. You already know. They're very, very powerful. But they're also very subtle. And they're also very wonderful. But they can also be very damaging. And so, I look at emotions as what you call a lot of the other areas of life. Finances can be a difficult area of life, but part of the reason finances are difficult is because we get emotional about it, okay? So a lot of whenever other areas of our life are affected, it's the emotional component that ramps that up some. And then you have maybe say the area of your intellect or your thinking capacity. Then you have the area of your physical well-being. You have the area of your spiritual well-being, your area of your relationships. What is it that makes relationships often complicated is the emotions involved. So see, my opinion is this: out of all the 7 areas at least that I've identified of life, spiritual life without doubt always takes the top. It's the number one, because if you don't get your spiritual life on the right course, it's going to have an ill effect on the rest of your living and the rest of your life. But I also will say this: second to and very close to it is your emotional life. If you don't address and deal with and look carefully at your emotional life and the health of that emotional life, it will affect you very negatively. If you take care, you tend to it, you address it, then what will happen is you'll find yourself being more effective. When your emotions are under the self-control we talked about last week, they're under that self-control, that God control, then what happens is the outcome can be extremely positive. Because just as we were singing this morning about God's love being fierce, that's not the first thing that you will hear people say, as Vanjie was saying, whenever they say, well, what do you think about God's love? It's fierce. It's not the first thing you think, but you look at it carefully and you cannot deny it is fierce. It's passionate enough for him, for the Father, to let his Son die. That's how passionate his love is for us. So how do we use our emotions for good rather than allowing our emotions to control us in ways that are unhealthy? I don't know if I'll fully answer that question today, but hopefully we're going to dig around at it enough that it will give you some good handles to hold on to. And so before we start with your sermon, your message sheet, there's really not notes there in front of you. It's a scripture sheet beside you. You can go ahead and grab it if you want to, but we're not going to start looking at that yet. I'm going to share a few examples from the Bible before we go to that to kind of set a platform for some of the things we're going to talk about in the scriptures. Exodus chapter 3, and this is not your notes, okay? This is just like a little intro here. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 11 is where God approached Moses out in the desert with a burning bush and told him he wanted to send him back into Egypt to deliver the children of Israel from the bondage of slavery. And here is what, now, you have to, I'm going to assume that most of you know the story of Moses. There's been movies made about it and everything else. If you didn't read it in the Bible, you've at least got some basic idea probably from a movie. And how he was adopted into Pharaoh's family, and he ended up as an adult, young adult, killing a slave master who was attacking one of the children of Israel. And then he fled for his life out to the wilderness and had been out there for 40 years at this point. So he's obviously had a lot of time away from the Egyptian environment, had a lot of time to think about everything, had a lot of time to complain to whatever, to all the sheep and everything else around him all day long. He'd had a lot of time to go by and to think about things. And here God shows up in this bush and says, hey, Moses, I got a plan for you. And I need you to go back into Egypt and deliver the children of Israel. Now he said a lot of things, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but here is the thing I want to point out to you that he said. He said, who am I? Who am I that you would send back? Now, from God's perspective on this, or from maybe even I assume it's God's perspective since he was the one choosing him, and that is Moses' life was spared as a baby when he was supposed to have been killed. And then he was placed in a basket in the Nile River, the edge of the Nile River. Pharaoh's daughter came down, her heart was touched by this baby, and so she adopted this boy, but then allowed the boy's mother to raise him up to about 12 years old. And then she took him as her son to Pharaoh's palace. And he understood and knew his roots as a Jewish slave, but he also became royalty in the king's palace. And he was schooled and trained in some of the best schooling, the best training that was offered. He was a part of the royal family. He belonged. He was in. And so when you look at all that, you're going, well, who better in the world would there to be? Someone who's been a slave, his parents are slaves, and his family is slaves still to this day. Here he is royalty. He can speak their language. He understands where they're coming from. This is perfect. I mean, I think in God's eye, this is like a no-brainer. I mean, Moses, why would I pick anybody else? But you have to look at things from Moses' standpoint. Moses looks at it as, okay, I was born a slave. I got adopted by the king's family. I lived under great privilege, even though I know that I come from slavery. I lived under great privilege, and I blew it. I blew it. I took things into my own hand. I killed somebody. I'm a murderer. I killed somebody. I can justify it all I want to, but I killed somebody. I lost the respect of everyone. So I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. I'm watching the sheep out here on the backside of the desert. And that's what I'll be doing till I die. So from his perspective, that question made a whole lot of sense. Who am I? But ultimately, God's answer to him was something very, very interesting. So Moses is approaching this from a standpoint of feeling inferior, feeling like I've messed up, I've blown it. Emotionally, he's looking at it as though I have no value. I'm of no. I feel inferior. All that stuff happened, but I blew it all. It's all gone. It's all past. I'm right where I need to be. But God said this to him. When Moses, they went through their whole conversation, and he said to tell them that the great I am sent you. That I am sent you. So see, what God wasn't asking Moses to do was he wasn't asking him to go in and kind of puff his chest out and go, yeah, I know all you guys in here. I know your language as well as you do. I know blah, blah, blah. I'm not, let's just set the record straight here, guys. I'm here to go ahead and rack this thing up. We're gonna take over. We're gonna do what we need to do. God wasn't asking him to do that. God wanted to use him because of all of those skill sets and all of those things that had happened that prepared him for this. But what God didn't want him to do was to go do this on his own strength or in his own ability. He didn't say, go in and tell him cool Moses is back. He said, tell him I am sent you. Notice the question that Moses said. He goes, who am I? Who am I? And God said, I am. Now, I don't know, but I suspect that every person that is alive goes through at least a season or a period of feeling inferior. Feeling like you don't quite measure up to other people or to other people's standards or even to your own standards. I think in this case, Moses had disappointed himself. He not only disappointed God, disappointed the Israelites, disappointed the Egyptians, he disappointed himself. And oftentimes, we've done that same kind of thing. We've kind of disappointed everybody. And so as a result, we kind of emotionally withdraw and kind of throw ourselves over on a trash heap someplace and go, I can't do nothing. Everything I do is going to mess up. And God's saying, well, I need you to do some things, but not because you're so cool, or not because I can't do it without you, but I'm going to choose to work through you. And you're doing it not because of who you are. You're doing it because of who I am. So our confidence comes from God. So let me just ask you very carefully, look carefully into your life in places where you feel inferior. Identify some areas where you feel inferior. And now sometimes people have superiority complexes. My opinion about superiority complexes is just another way of demonstrating inferiority. In other words, if I go around having to talk about how I have so much more than that person, I'm so much smarter than that person, I can do this that person can't do, I'm always comparing myself to people who are inferior to me in some way, or they're not as capable, or not as good, actually, that's probably a pretty clear indication of your own inferiority. That's just another way it gets expressed. But a lot of real honest people approach this from the standpoint of going, I really don't feel good about myself. I feel very inferior, and even if you don't go around saying it, you feel that inside. You feel inferior. I would like to ask you to identify an area of inferiority that you feel in your life right now. Some place that you go, it might be that you feel like you're an inferior parent. It might be that you feel like you're an inferior spouse. It might be that you feel like you're an inferior worker. It might be that you feel like you're inferior in your family. I mean, I could go on and on. You just have to identify what it is. But whatever it is, a specific thing that you feel inferior about. And here's what I want to tell you. Here's the answer if we were to ask you in some way to do something with regard to that area and you feel inferior, you would want to say, well, who am I? I mean, why would you ask me to do that? Who am I? And see, the answer isn't who you are. The answer is whose you are. Who do you belong to? Now, honestly, if, I mean, there's some things that all of us aren't good at. But if you're just, look, we have some really good golfers in this house. We do. They're better. They think they're better than they are, but they're pretty good. They are pretty good. Now, honestly, I gave up golfing. I never ever was serious about it, but I gave up golfing because normally, if I went golfing, I was trying to use it as a tool to influence people, because you go out there, you spend a lot of time out there, so it's like, I might as well take some people I'm trying to influence. Well, what I found out was I was a really bad witness, because the way I played golf, if that was supposed to be influencing them toward Jesus, they were going, man, if that Jesus followed Jesus, anything like that, man, this guy's a bad one. We don't, so I didn't feel like I was really being a very good influence out there. And not because I was cussing when I missed balls or stuff like that, but just because it was terrible. I mean, I spent more time in the woods looking for balls. Now, I'm gonna brag on myself just for a minute, okay? I can hit balls really far. I mean, really far. Like almost Tiger Woods far, I think. Anyway, it's been a long time. But you want to tell you something? I have no idea where they're going. No idea. So, so I can hit the ball, But don't, I have no idea. I mean, every once in a while, you get lucky, and it would go right down the, fairway. And then I would think, man, I can do this until the next shot. And then it was like all over again. My confidence is down. So we here's the thing. We have to be honest with ourselves and say, I'll just have to tell you, I'm not a good golfer. I don't ever think I will be a good golfer. It's not a goal of mine to be a good golfer. But I don't have to feel inferior about that. See, we don't have to be good at everything. So you don't feel inferior about things you're not necessarily good at, but there are certain parts or certain areas of our life where we know it's important to actually do well in, and we feel like a failure, and we feel inferior in that area. And that's an area where you got to stop counting on your own confidence, and you have to start counting on God's ability. This wasn't about Moses' ability. Yes, he was equipped in many ways to do this. He was a person, he had a lot of skill sets in place to do this. But what God didn't need his skill sets. It was good for communication purposes, but what he needed was him to trust God and to rely upon God and to remember this is something God's doing. See, when Moses killed that guy before, that was something Moses was doing. He was taking it in his own hands. In this case, God's saying, Moses, it's not up to you. It's not about who you are. It's about who I am. Is there some area in your life today you just need to say, I need to make that about who God is and who he can be in my life, and quit trying to prove things on my own? Second example I want to use, and I know this is going to seem like I'm preaching my whole sermon here. Maybe I should put it like this. This is kind of half of my sermon, the next part's half, okay? Well, actually, to be honest with you, there's so much stuff I want to say about this issue today. I'm going to save what I can get in time, and we'll be done, okay? And then you come back next week, and I want to tell you this. Please, whatever you do, come back next week. I don't care if you have to cancel vacation time, anything else, get back here next week because you're going to hear a story that I've just been able to hear pieces of the story. Shelley's going to be speaking next week, and you're going to be hearing a story of taming this thing called emotions, taming the lion. And it's a story of victory. It's a story of power, and you do not want to miss it. In fact, invite people to come with you, okay? Make sure that you're here. But I'm going to do what I can do today because this is something that I care deeply about. It's something I've looked at very carefully, and there's no way I'll cover everything I want to, but what I'm going to try to do is cover the important things that I think are critical. So second story or second example, I'm trying to set these examples up because I think they give us a bit of a word picture before you go into the scriptures below here. And that is in Joshua chapter 1, in verse 6, 7, and 9. Now, I'm not going to read them, but there's something and these aren't on your sheet, okay? You can write the reference down if you want to. This is where Moses had died. Now, God says to Joshua, hey, Joshua, all the people who didn't believe, they're dead. Moses is dead. I didn't let him go in the land of promise. But now is the time. We're going to go in, and you're my man. Joshua, you're the guy. You're the one who's going to lead us in here. Now, 3 times in this conversation with God, you know what God said to him? He said, hey, by the way, Joshua, look me in the eye. Look right here in the eye. Don't be afraid. And we've said this many, many times. The only reason God ever tells you not to be afraid is because rightfully you should be scared to death. And so he's saying, hey, we're going to go in and, take over this land, those big old giants you saw back over there. You said we could do it. Remember back there when you were a spy? Hey, we're doing it, and you're the man. But he said to him 3 times, look me in the eye. And he said this, do not be afraid. But he didn't just say that. He said something else. Be strong and courageous. And in one case, he says, be very strong, very courageous. So here Joshua is facing the giants that he had seen before without Moses. Moses has gone on to his heavenly reward. Now Joshua stepped out. He's the lead guy. He's the point man. And in this moment, all eyes are on him, and he knows. I mean, he'd been with Moses all the way through this. He knows what these children of Israel people are like. He knows they can be very, very fickle. They can be on today and off tomorrow. I mean, he knows what he's dealing with. And he's a very obedient person. He's one, but he is being told 3 times right off the bat, Don't be afraid, but be strong and courageous. Now, I want to tell you that I believe the emotion of fear, it is God-given, and it's a wonderful thing. And there are some things we should fear. Now, right at the top of my list of things to fear are snakes. I am confident the smartest fear you can have is of snakes. You see a snake, just run as fast as you can in the other direction. I mean, there's no point in hanging around trying to figure out whether it's poisonous or not, okay? I grew up in South Florida where we had plenty of rattlesnakes. As far as I'm concerned, every snake I see is a rattlesnake. I'm done. I'm out. I don't want anything to do with it, okay? And if you like snakes, you know, God will deal with you in eternity. But anyway, I'm just, you know, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so I think fears spare our life. Fears are great. And we're told to fear God. That means have this, I'm like, trembling awe of who he is. Fear is a good thing. But you want me to tell you this? Fear has kept more good people from doing good things than any other emotional life. It has held back people from pursuing God callings. It's held back people from even aspiring to greatness, maybe in the area of business. Fear is God-given, but fear that overwhelms us is not God-given. God never paralyzes us with fear. He never wants us to be paralyzed by fear. Fear is given for a good caution, for a good, hey, take notice, pay attention, don't get yourself in a difficult situation. So fear is a good thing, but here's what God's remedy for fear is. And so if you want to say, well, how do I take this terrible emotion of fear that sometimes overwhelms me, causes me to feel very anxious, causes me to feel very overwhelmed, paralyzes me, makes me like I can't even move. What do I do with that? Well, I can tell you what God told Joshua. He said, be strong and courageous. Now, I'm just going to tell you, Drew, are you up there? Okay. Drew's a fighter. I mean, not in a bad way, not a brawler, but I mean, he's a MMA fighter. Okay, and that I don't know what that says about your IQ level, Drew, but anyway, I'm just saying, he get kicked in the head. I guess his job is to kick your butt. But anyway, but here's the deal. He's a strong man. He's a very strong man. It's one of the first things you notice when you see him. He's a strong man. And even if you're in a bad mood or you're thinking, well, I'd like to punch somebody today. If you saw Drew, you're thinking, well, I probably won't punch him. I'll just kind of go on over here. I'll find somebody else to punch. I'm not going to punch. I'm not going to get in that one. Josh. No. Anyway, you set me up for it, baby. So he complained about me always referring to Drew as a strong man when he's sitting right over here. Anyway, but here's what I've noticed about strong people. It doesn't matter if it's physical strength or moral strength or something else. Nobody gets strong overnight. You can't drink a cup of liquid strength and just, while you're there. You don't get strong overnight. People that I know that are spiritually strong, they have been faithful day after day after day to certain practices. People that are strong physically have been faithful over and over and over again, certain things. So whenever we say be strong in the Lord, when God was saying that to Joshua, he wasn't saying, hey, Joshua, now start reading your Bible today. Start being a good little Sunday school boy. Come on now. You got to be strong. He was saying the strength that you already live in, lean into that strength. And so he talks about, this is in the passage, it says that to read from the scriptures every day. Go read Joshua 1, you'll see it in there. Read from the scriptures every day, really just as you've been doing, keep doing that. Keep your focus, keep your attention on what God said. Don't waver from that. There's where your strength is. Your strength is not in yourself. Your strength is in your relationship with the living God. Your strength is in what you've been doing for all these 40 plus years as you've been coming across, you're following Moses. Your strength is not in your buffness. Your strength is in the connection that you have developed and you maintain with God have been maintained with God through these years. So whenever we say, well, how do you address fears that are overwhelming, whatever, you have to start the process of being strong. Being strong means that you start the process of doing the things that make you strong, and you keep doing them, and you don't quit doing them, and you keep doing them for the rest of your life. That's what makes you strong. And what makes us weak is being fully unprepared, being disconnected from God, not knowing exactly where we stand with him, not knowing how to handle that relationship with him. And being strong is being connected on an everyday basis with God, every day. And you say, well, I have days I don't read the Bible. There's other ways to be connected to God than read the Bible. Reading the Bible is a great way, and it's an important way, and he told Joshua to do it every day. He told him to do it every day. He said, keep doing it every day. But what I would say is this. Here's the problem that most of us face, and that is if we don't do something one day that has to do with spiritual disciplines, we have a tendency to chuck it and go, man, I'm just not good at that. That reading the Bible thing, I don't seem to be able to get that down. That prayer thing, I don't seem to be all that accomplished at it. And so we don't mean to throw it away. We just we give up on it. I've said this before, and I'll just say it very briefly here. How many of you have ever missed a meal before? How many of you have ever missed a meal? Okay. When you miss that meal, did you just have a little talk with yourself and say, I really don't do meals very well. So I just can't do meals. I'm going to stop eating. This is ridiculous. Here I am. I missed lunch, worked right through it, didn't even know it, and here I am at 5 o'clock. I just might as well quit eating. Boy, some of us wish we could do that, but the fact is that we immediately go back. In fact, sometimes we'll go, well, since I missed lunch, I can go back for seconds and thirds tonight. I mean, this is awesome. So we make up for it. Wouldn't it be cool if in our spiritual life we go, hey, I was a little famished yesterday. Man, I'm just going to smorgasbord on the book of Proverbs today or something. I had someone tell me recently that they started reading Proverbs something, and they said, I end up binge reading it. I'm like, high five. It's awesome. Someone binge reading the Bible, man. You're binge reading the Bible. That's a pretty good indication. That's all right. So here's the deal. If you want to have the strength that God's telling Joshua to have to help you be able to deal with the fears that come at you, you have to be strong in the Lord. And the only way I know to be strong in the Lord is operate in the spiritual disciplines, to operate in the things that make one strong, and that is being healthy intake of what God has to give you on a regular basis. Now, he also says, be courageous. See, courageous is a little different step. Being strong is one thing, but then that's putting your strength to action is whenever you're courageous. Fear makes us want to withdraw. We want to hide. We want to go into hiding. We want to withdraw from any challenge. He said, don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. Courageous means that we proactively go after whatever it is that we need to be facing. Last week I talked a little bit about this right at the close, and that is, if you want to be emotionally healthy, I think one of the most significant ways of that is be diligent about taking care of business. The whole idea of eating the frog first or whatever. What is it that it scares you the most about today? What do you feel the most fearful about? Just go ahead and do it. Just go ahead and take that on. Don't procrastinate the things that worry you. Make them a priority, in fact. The more you learn to do that, you'll gain strength. You'll realize things aren't quite as bad as you thought they were, and that you'll also realize that you're able to push through and work through tough things. And pushing through and working through tough things is part of being an adult. It's part of being someone who's mature. It's part of being somebody who knows how to take care of business. And what I've noticed is this in my own life and other people, the more you learn how to take care of business, do the right thing at the right time, at the right place, the more you learn to do that, the stronger you are. And the more courageous you are. The less you're afraid of what's coming towards you. And that confidence is based on a realization that you're never alone. God is with you. I mean, that's one of the things that God told Joshua. You're never going to be alone. In fact, he even told him, he says, I've already won this whole thing for you. All you got to do is take it. And if we have that kind of faith and confidence that God has already cleared the way before us, all we're doing is just going and kind of mopping up whatever it is. But you have to be connected to God. And if you're not, then you're on your own. And being on your own is not a pretty place to be in situations where courage is required. So using our emotions for good, instead of living as a fearful person, let's learn to live as a strong person who has courage to face the difficulties of life. The third example that I want to give you is found in Judges, and it's a man that it's pretty interesting. I might actually read you a few of these verses. This is not on your notes either. So, do we have anything on our notes? Yeah, you have stuff on your notes. I just hadn't gotten to it, okay? So we'll get there. But in Judges chapter 6, there's this man named Gideon. Gideon's a very interesting person because he seems on the out front as he's kind of shy. He's kind of backward a little bit. He's not like the first person you'd think of as someone who's going to do something great. And he didn't think that either. He experienced some of those feelings of inferiority as well. Chapter 6, verses 14. Just listen carefully. I'm going to read 3 verses to you. It says, "Then the Lord turned to him," this is Gideon, "and said, 'Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you.'" In one sense, that's all that was needed. God to show up, send the angel of the Lord to Gideon, and just say that. I mean, basically what he's saying is, you have strength right now. Go in that strength and rescue Israel from Midianites. I'm sending you. That's all he needed. Do you think that was good enough for Gideon? No, because the Midianites, I was reading the whole story here, again, refreshing myself on it. The Midianites, for 7 years, had taken over the Israelites. And the Israelites were actually, a lot of them were up in like the mountainside, living in caves. They were living in any kind of an outdoor place they could find to hide from the Midianites, because the Midianites would come through when their crops had just come and destroy their crops and destroy their animals. I mean, they were just trying to keep them impoverished, keep them down, keep them just pushed down. And when they would swarm in like that, they would be like locusts. So they were just like dominating, just tearing, just keeping them pushed way, way down. And so, in fact, Gideon was hiding, kind of threshing out some wheat, right, whenever the Lord sent his angel to him. And so he's hiding, doing this stuff, because they're always trying to hide from the Midianites at this point in Israel's history. And they were under this because they had walked away from God, and they had turned away from God, and God let them fall under the oppression of the Midianites. Listen to Gideon's very bold response. "But Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." Now, hear what God said to him. Go with the strength you have. You have enough strength right now. Go ahead and go do it. I've given them to you. And I've got this. Gideon's like, get a life. Who do you think you're talking to? Do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who I am? See, if you were at Clyde, which I know many of you weren't, but the speaker there talked about the different tribes of Israel, how the tribes of Benjamin, Joseph in particular, because they were from the favored mom of Israel's wives, and so there was definitely, and some of these were from maidens of the wives and that kind of thing. Some of these clans come from, or some of these tribes, and so there's a pecking order. They're looking out and going, "You're from the tribe of Benjamin? That's a pretty classy tribe. You're from Manasseh? Well, I mean, you're still part of the clan. You're a Jew, but man, you came from that line? Are you serious?" And so he's saying, this is not, we aren't Levites here. We're not like looked up to. We're not. We're kind of we're the weakest. We're the weakest. And I'm the least. That just really meant he's the youngest in his whole family system. I'm a kid. Everybody still thinks I'm a kid. Verse 16, the Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." You'll destroy this big mass, this gangster group here, as though you're fighting against one man. Now, that seems like that should be enough to settle it. As you well know, many of you know, if you know the story, it didn't quite settle it. it did get him going and thinking, and he began to pursue. And one of the things he did do was he offered up a sacrifice or he offered an offering to this angel of the Lord that came. And whenever he laid it on a stone, as the angel told him to do, then a fire came from heaven and just burned it to a crisp. And so then he knew, without a doubt, he'd been in the very presence of God, and he was in awe, he was scared, everybody had his attention. Now, here's the deal. He went, because in front of his father's house, there was an altar to Baal. There was a pole that had to do with the worship of a female god, and he went and he tore all that down and built an altar to the living God. Well, the townspeople, his fellow Jewish townspeople, were not real happy about that. In fact, they said, who did this? And they found out who did it. And they said, bring him out, we're going to kill him. Now, Gideon's dad stood out in front of him with him and said, look, you're going to kill him for your God? If he's God, can he defend himself? You got to do it for him. You can't let him defend himself. I mean, he's really a God. He can take care of Gideon. He can kill him right now. They didn't have a good answer, so they let him go. But they still weren't happy. Bottom line is this. Gideon gathered up a small band of soldiers, and he did do a fleece. And in that fleece, he wanted to, he did it once. Then he still said, oh, don't be mad at me, God. But I still feel kind of inferior here. I still don't feel like I'm up for it. I got to really know, So he did the opposite for the fleece. It all came out. Now here's a guy who looked at himself as, I'm the little kid on the block. My pedigree is not all that cool. I don't really have. I'm just trying to get together another meal for another day. God pulls him out and says, look, I've got something I need you to do. Do it. He very hesitantly, God kind of had to drag him through the whole process. But because when he did obey, he obeyed faithfully, and he did everything God asked him to do. I want to tell you what happened during his lifetime. It says in chapter 8 and verse 28 of Judges, it says this. That is the story of how Israel subdued Midian, which never recovered. Midian never recovered. Throughout the rest of Gideon's lifetime, about 40 years, the land was at peace. Even if a nation thought about going, hey, the Israelites got some pretty good crops over there and pretty good camels and stuff, let's go get them. That guy Gideon, he's still alive. He's still living over there. Remember what he did to the Midianites? Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, let's go tackle somebody else. No one would mess with him as long as Gideon was alive. Because he was so cool? No, because he was a person who viewed himself as small, but he came to believe and have faith that God could do something big. Not because he was big, but because God was big. I mean, if God says to you, and you know what the Midianites are like, and you've seen them come through and do raids, and God says to you, you'll destroy him as though it's just one man, which is really how it happened, then in that case, you don't go around going, well, the strategy we came up with, man, we're going to sell this on the market. We're going to, I bet you the United States, when they come along later, would love to use our strategy. No, the United States, everybody else would laugh at your strategy because it's not a good military strategy, but what it was an obedience to God. And do you know that most of the emotions that we have that hold us back are things that Satan will use? He will work in the midst of our emotions, how we feel about things. He'll use that to sabotage us. He'll use that to keep us from being courageous, bold, doing, obeying, acting in faith. See, the opposite of being beat down by our emotions is being bold and courageous. Now, I don't mean being foolish, doing stupid stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm just simply saying not allowing fear or inferiority or feelings of inadequacy to keep us in a place where we're non-productive, where we're not doing the things that we know we're capable of doing. Last example, Matthew chapter 8 tells a story of the disciples and Jesus getting into the water. And Brandon, I'm not going to get into your message. By the way, Brandon's preaching this Thursday night at Celebrate Recovery, and he's getting graded on it. So come and grade him. You can give him. It won't affect. You can give him an F, and it won't affect his outcome grade. But you can anyway. No, come and not everybody's grading him, but he is going to be sharing. And I'm about ready to get into his territory right now, but I'm not going to really get there. Okay, Brandon. But thanks for the idea anyway. Matthew chapter 8, verses 23, it says, and Jesus got into the boat and started to cross the lake with his disciples. Suddenly a terrible storm came up with waves breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went to him, woke him up, shouting, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Were they being a little emotional? Yeah. The thing that's kind of interesting to me about this, these are sailors. I mean, these are guys, but not all of them, So it may have been some guys that weren't fishermen who were, losing it or something. But at least about a third of these or more were very, very, very well-seasoned fishermen. They've been on this lake their whole life. And they're shouting, save us. We're going to drown, which means it must have been a pretty terrible storm. And here's what Jesus answered. Why are you afraid? See, doesn't that get you about God? He's always either telling you not to be afraid when you ought to be afraid, or he's going, why are you afraid? Well, what do you think, why am I afraid? The boat looks like it's going to tip over. I mean, you don't want to be disrespectful, but it's like, do you see what's going on? And I think most of us had situations or circumstances where we've been emotionally distraught, and we're going, where is God when you need him? What is going on? Where is he right now? Where are you, God? Are you asleep? Well, understand, the only reason Jesus was sleeping is because he was not only fully God, but he was fully man. And as fully man, he did sleep. But God our Father and Jesus in his glorified holy body, they're not sleeping. So you can't use, the disciples could use that on Jesus. He was sleeping, but you can't use that on him. God's always awake. But I will tell you what, I do think there's sometimes whenever, have you ever seen your kids kind of getting themselves in trouble? And you decided not to rescue them right at first because you were thinking this might be a teachable moment. Everything short of death I'm going to let happen here. I see where they're headed with this, and it is disaster, but I think they'll be short of death, so we're going to let it unfold. You watch it, And sometime later, your kid might go, well, if you know what's going to happen, why didn't you stop me? Because you didn't want to be stopped. You wanted to do what you were going to do, and I wanted you to learn a lesson. God doesn't play games, but I can tell you, we're his kids. And there are times whenever he's going, hey, have at it. He's got the fishing line. Run with it. Just run. Keep on going there. Oh, you need help now. You're going to call me. You're in a panic. Well, see, just because we're in a panic doesn't mean God needs to panic. And Jesus is saying, I think what he's really saying is, I'm laying in a boat. You already believe I'm God. You think God drowns that easily? What he says, he's saying, you have so little faith. Now, Brandon's going to give a take on that you want to hear. That's not necessarily the story, but the same concept, little faith. You want to come and hear that Thursday night. But here's what I want to tell you. Let's listen to the rest of it. Then he stood up and rebuked the wind and waves, and suddenly all was calm. The disciples, listen to this, they just sat there in awe. Who is this? They asked themselves. Even the wind and waves obey him. They knew who he was. That's why they were following him. But they still didn't know who he was. Do you know you can be following God for a while and still keep finding out things about God that blow your mind? Like, oh, God, I never saw that one coming. I never saw how you would do that. I never realized. The disciples, again, this is an issue of fear. They were afraid for their lives. They were afraid they were going to die prematurely. They called out to be saved. And I think what Jesus ultimately is saying is, you need to, at some point you need to get this. If I'm with you, you're okay, no matter what the circumstances are. And I think if we can get that tidbit of truth into our spirit, into our hearts, that if God's with us, and we know he's with us, we're going to be okay. We might go through some deep valleys. We might go through over some wonderful mountains of victory in our life. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, if God is with us, we're okay. So I don't know, there's all kinds of emotions, and I thought about talking about all the different emotions, but then that would just have taken so much time. So kind of focus on some that probably are primary. Feelings of inferiority and fear. What I'm not going to do, I'm not going to share the scriptures on the sheet in front of you. But what I would like to ask you to do as a homework assignment is this. And that is to go through these scriptures and to underline the things that are using emotions for good. And I'll just give you an example. Hate, on the first line across, hate what is wrong. If you're going to hate something, don't hate people, and don't hate in a murderous kind of way. Hate what's wrong. Because if you hate what's wrong, you'll probably do something about it in your life and to help other people. So using your emotions, see, all emotions are God-given. And he doesn't want us to hate people, but he does want us to hate evil. And so all emotions, the capacity we have, are God-given. All Satan wants to do is just twist those and pervert them so that we use them for wrong purposes. We use them only for pleasure in ways that are against God's word, his ways, that we use them to be self-destructive in our lives. And there's a whole list of things in all these passages that talk about positive ways to use your emotions for good. Just go on a little bit of a treasure hunt with that and see the ones you can find, because it's filled with them.